All right. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Future Focus, where we are living at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. I'm looking forward to this week's conversation, like I look forward to every conversation I have. But this one in particular has a special place in my heart because we are talking about customer education, but not just the traditional customer education, but really thinking about customer experience, the role that education plays in that. And we're not just talking about customer tutorial videos or courses. We're talking about it as a holistic strategy. So to help me navigate that conversation, I'm joined by Steve Cornwell. And I'm going to let you introduce yourself because we've got the North Pass thing and we got the Gainsight, and there's just a whole lot to that. So for folks who may not be familiar with you, Steve, why don't you tell people a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, sure. It's great to be with you, Chris. It's awesome to be on the show. So as Chris said, Steve Cornwell, I'm currently serving as a SVP of strategy over at Gainsight. But prior to that, and how I even got to Gainsight, is I spent the better part of the last decade or so building a learning platform specifically designed for helping B2B companies run their customer education programs. That business was called North Pass. Now we're part of Gainsight. And the reason there is because Gainsight, who for many of your audience probably knows, is the leader in customer
Yeah,
success
lots of stuff
software.
with that.
Yeah, amazing. And Gainsight, we've just done an amazing job over the past couple of years expanding beyond just customer success in terms of customer success management and helping customer success managers do their job to really expanding the customer success practice to much broader, and education is a huge part of helping
Huge.
customers succeed, right? So maybe the number
Yeah,
one
we're going to get into
way.
that one because
Yeah,
it's, I think, an
do it.
underserved. People don't talk about it enough. It's kind of an afterthought that people are like, yeah, if we think about it. And I'm looking forward to helping highlight why people should be paying more attention to that one. So,
Yeah.
okay.
So
And
in
how
July,
long has it been? When did all that go down? The integration of the two? Because it's
yeah,
been a little
absolutely.
bit now,
So
right?
yep, it's been about 6 or 7 months. So hard to believe it's flown by. In July of 2023, so just 7 months ago,
Okay.
Gainsight and North Pass joined forces, and I think we're doing some amazing things for education and customer experience and customer success.
Yeah. Now, when we were backstage, you were talking about your journey a little bit, and really the kind of discipline was the entrepreneurship side. So I'm actually curious, what drew you to customer education? Because you obviously could have gone in a lot of different directions. So first of all, there was kind of the technology angle, but then also the customer education. And what contributed to that, the decision to take that path?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I'd say I call myself entrepreneur founder first, right? And then in the past decade spent really
Yeah.
in the domain of education, and it's been awesome. And how I got there was that in a prior business before North Pass, we had quite a challenge training our customers. And it was a really cool business. It was very early
Mm.
for its time. It was a data service platform for the retail supply chain, right? Like super, super niche and specialized.
Specific. Yeah.
And one of the things that we were doing was we were teaching our customers how to use our data service, how to use our product and our
Okay.
analytics. But the bigger thing we were educating our customers on was why they should be
Mm.
using this data service. And what it came down to was the old way of analyzing their business was no longer effective. And there was a new way that they needed to start thinking about to keep up with all of the changes in e-commerce, changes with the internet, changes with consumer expectations. So our education challenge was part product, but more methodology, more
Okay.
education, more best practice. And
Well, and a
so
lot of that
we,
sounds like the contextual side of it, helping
yeah,
people understand, like, yes, you need to do this differently, but if you don't understand the why, you're not going to have the desire to overcome the behavior change.
exactly. And so in that business, we were doing that manually. This was 2003 to
Okay.
2012, about right, trainers flying out places. And I'm thinking at the time, I'm thinking to myself, this one, it's terribly expensive, and two, it's a terrible end user experience. Like I would go to them and observe them, and it's like no one likes being here. And And so there had to be a better way to do it. Yeah, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
it's just the way it was. If we're super candid about it.
Hey,
And
I cut my teeth. I cut my teeth in corporate software implementation for healthcare
yep.
going into
So
that.
you know,
And everything you just described brings back all these memories of like you show up and they don't really want you there because
no
they're
one's
like,
happy
oh
to
my
see
gosh, like nobody's happy to see you, but you got to do it. And it's super inefficient. And you're there and they're like, now's not a good time. You spend all this time like sitting in the waiting room because they're like, just, I don't know, sit there for, and you're like, this is broken on so many levels.
Yeah. Yeah. So then we got that business. We looked at doing something about that. We said there's got to be a better way to do this. We looked at LMS. I found out there was this thing called an LMS. What do you know?
Yeah.
And so I looked at those and really interesting systems. But at that time, right, it was Sum Total, it was Saba, it was Cornerstone. You know, those big players. What were they
Very
focused on?
internally facing. Focused.
Yeah, very
Yes, we were
internally
focused
focused.
on the needs of employees and internal, which customer education is a different animal.
Right. So then it came down to, hey, do we kind of like Jimmy rig this thing and get it to work? Or do we like roll a WordPress site and like try to do something or a home? And all the answers were bad. And so
It's
we
like an
didn't do
episode of
anything.
MacGyver. I feel like the original days of customer education, it was like MacGyver. You're like, we got all these things. They're not designed for any of these intended purposes, but with enough duct tape, toothpicks, and rubber bands, we might be able to make it work and see
Might be
what we can
able.
come up with.
Right. Exactly. So then we didn't do anything because it was just not worth the headache.
Yeah.
And then that business was acquired by a NASDAQ company, much, significant scale company. I went to work for them and help them integrate the businesses. And sure enough, they had that same problem that we had, but it was instead of 500 customers, it was like 50,000 customers. And I went, oh, wow, this is actually
You
an
saw the
economic
problem at a
problem.
scale that was like,
Yeah.
okay, we might have been able to like toothpick and bubble gum this
Right.
together for 500 people, but 50,000, the problems just exponentially get worse.
Right. So, so that's how NorthPass was born. It was just a classic, hey, entrepreneur sees a problem and wants to go solve a problem. And that's how NorthPass was solved. At the time, I had no idea what I was doing in terms of L&D and learning frameworks. Like I wasn't a training practitioner. I wasn't a learning practitioner. I think still to this day, I don't consider myself that. But we set out to build a piece of software that a company could use to help educate its customers in a way that was modern and intuitive and the way the customers would want, and that would dramatically lower the cost structure of training operations internally for the company. And that was the goal we were solving.
Okay. Well, and I like how you brought that up because I mean, for me, so my situation going back to where I'm a former math and computer science teacher for middle schoolers. And I come in and similar to you, I'm like, this isn't really my space, but I'm looking around going, I know there's a better way to do this. Like this is a serious problem that we have to address, but it was a very unmet need at the time. And it sounds like the time frame was very similar because I was in the early 2000s doing this and going, we had the same, you're like setting up a internet site and trying to host things. You're like, I don't know how we're going to make this thing work. And it was messy. So I am curious on this because let's talk about this a little bit, because for people who listen, who may not be as familiar with customer education, I think one of the things that is important to unpack is it's not like customer education is completely radically different than education as a whole. I think there's a lot of similarities to it. So there's some things you can take, but there are some dynamic differences that just, you can't just go, well, that's how we do it. But I think that's what people did. They go, well, we have an LMS for our employees. Can't we just use that for our customers? Why wouldn't that work? And I've been through many, many of these conversations where you go, it just doesn't. And even if the RFP box checks and says, yeah, no, it can do it for customers, you're like, yeah, but the workflow, the user experience, the way it is designed is not designed for that. So what were some of the things specifically that when you looked at this, you went, we've got to fix this?
Mm-hmm. So two things. So one, we always said, hey, there's a learner aspect. We have two customers. We're serving the learners. We're building for the learners, and we're also building for the builders. And on the learner side, we said our kind of found our kind of principle there that we went on was uh, learners of these vendors
Yep.
don't have to do this. Unlike an L&D team or a compliance team saying, thou will take my training or thou will be fired. It's like, great, we have 100%
You have to
engagement.
do it by the end of these 3 weeks or else. There's a little bit of a stick at the back of this thing.
Yeah. So 100% completion rates. Great. Right. And the customer side, it's like, no one has to do this. They don't have to take training. It's in their best interest to, but only if you make it so. And so we focus very heavily on making that customer experience or the end learner's experience great. And our inspiration for that at that time, because Northwest was started around 2014, so we had some really interesting innovations come before us. If you remember, like the MOOCs, right? Like Udemy and Coursera and edX did some great stuff. Masterclass really like innovated that digital front end to the learning experience. So we were inspired by that, and that made its way into our product. Then on the
for the
admin
time
side,
when those things stood up, for the time, that really was the cutting edge of what learner experience, I guess, if you want to put it in that, a good digital learning experience. They did a really good job going, hey, online education does not have to suck. Like, we can actually make this a positive user experience, which before it had kind of been an afterthought. It was like, well, you know, if we do it, we'll get around to it. So yeah, it is funny thinking back to those days. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, so that was the first principle on the learner side. And then on the builder side, we said we're building for people that have all this proprietary knowledge. They don't have the luxury of going to a course catalog, shopping it, and then piecing together a curriculum like traditional L&D does in many cases, right? So we said we have to make this building experience awesome, enjoyable, delightful, efficient. And so those were the two kind of founding principles of both sides of the platform that we went off on. And we thought,
and when you say the building part, are you talking about the back end, like the actually creation of the experience itself for that operator on the back end that has to put this thing together? Because again, if you're talking about corporate experience, sometimes you have more tools at your disposal that you didn't always have, tools and resources at your disposal to pull things together that you may not have on the customer education side. Is that what you're talking about?
It is, exactly. And in a way, like, we kind of were, I think we were fortunate early, but then kind of paid a price later. So early, when we got this going, remember, we were coming from like an entrepreneurial point of view. We were like product managers in our last business trying to serve our customers, right? We weren't trainers. We were just trying to get our customers to use the product. So we didn't have I don't think we even knew what L&D was. I don't even think we knew there was a thing of corporate training. And early on, I think that was really beneficial for us because we could kind of build without boundaries. And we built for like a common professional that didn't have any training expertise. They might have been a customer success manager, a product manager, some business operations manager, some way to take their knowledge, translate it from their brain into an online curriculum.
So you're building for the lowest common denominator to say, hey, the people that were doing this, they have not committed a career to this. They may not have the baseline skill sets that you can take for granted sometimes in a corporate learning environment where it's like, well, you probably know all this stuff.
Right. Only later did we come to realize, oh, there's actually a department for this in some companies. And then, and then we had to mature, the product and the organization in certain ways because we wanted to serve a broader and bigger audience, right? But early on, that's not how we got going.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, it is. I just think about what you're talking. I think some of the other things that come to mind for me that I think you're hitting on that addresses. On the customer side, a lot of the stuff has to be custom created because it's customer facing.
Mm-hmm.
You can't curate customer education content like you can you can't go, well, we're teaching people about our tools. Let's just curate some off the shelf stuff because it's like, well, there isn't any. So that need to pull from your subject matter experts, these other people to be able to go into it. And really, so I have to imagine you were thinking about while you may not have had the official L&D terms for it at that point, you were thinking about user-generated content probably earlier than maybe some of the more traditional L&D functions were, because you had to pull from those subject matter experts directly into the education strategy versus having kind of an intermediary that was doing the intermediary work. Is that fair?
That's right. Yeah, 100%.
Okay. Okay. So as you think about this now and you look at this, I think one of the things that we talked about backstage that is interesting is that I just did a post on this yesterday, that a lot of times when people think about education, they just think about the content and, getting that content out. But there's that is an important piece, but there's more to it. So now that you're integrated with a larger customer experience piece, how is that influencing it? Because yes, for a customer LMS, you are thinking about, hey, we have this content. We need to make sure we get it in people's hands and we need to connect the dots. And there's a lot of work that goes into that, like the context. But now you actually have some opportunity to expand beyond that. So what does that look like as you look at kind of the future of customer experience, I would say, because customer education is just part of that bigger bundle?
I think this is such an exciting topic for us to explore. And it was where I'm going to go to with this was actually one of like the most compelling reasons why I was excited to join forces with Gainsight. And so when we think about like the future of customer learning, the future of customer success, I think the future that we envision is a much more integrated customer experience with a very, very well-designed holistic customer journey. And education is a major part of that. And today, when you think about how customers become successful with products, they have to go through a support center, which might be disconnected from the community, which might be disconnected from knowledge base articles, which might be disconnected, oftentimes disconnected in all those examples, from the learning management system. Maybe there's some tutorials that go out via email from an account manager or a support person. Maybe there's a YouTube page in some consumer products that have like how-tos from a whole bunch
it's
of
usually a very discombobulated, like I think anybody listening or watching who can think about this, when you think about a service or a product that you have, when you need help or you're trying to make more of that service or product, a lot of times it's clear how discombobulated that customer experience is.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's like, well, you need this. Oh, no, we can't help you with that. You got to go figure this out. And you may not even know that other thing exists. And you might go, well, that wasn't very helpful. It's very fragmented.
Right. Right. And so we at Gainsight, we see a world where instead of companies having, 15 different digital properties to help customers succeed, we see a world where there's actually like two. You have your product, and then you have this other digital hub or this customer
your
hub,
customer experience hub type.
right, where it brings together your blog, your knowledge articles, it brings together your courses, your certificate programs, it brings together all of these, video libraries, everything, to provide that really, really unified experience. And that's what we're building towards. And I think you mentioned the content creation, and then separately from that, there's a lot more. And that's really that delivery. And that's really where we're hyper focused on right now, is that delivery side. And so one part is really unifying the experience to make it a great experience for the users. The other part, though, is making sure that experience is then really personalized, right? And serves the right information for people. And at Gainsight, I think we have a unique, probably we're the only company that has the unique opportunity to really deliver on the value proposition of personalization in the customer learning world, because we have so much information about how our customers use their products, use their services, engage with them, all types of indicators on health and product utilization, and so many different signals that we can now use that to trigger the right content to the right people at the right time, which has been, the dream, right, of every education professional for a long time. And I think what's been missing is the connection of the learning platform to the customer platform.
Yeah, and I don't think people have always seen that connection. I mean, and maybe it's changed over the years, but I've stayed close enough to education that to me this continues to be an opportunity. There's two things that stand out on what you said. Is one, I mean, I just remember back to my early days in customer education, the value that came from one of the products that I stood up as an education product was system assessment, where we would go in and actually assess system usage to see where are there those learning opportunities. Because again, people just didn't, and we're talking system specific, but I think it applies in a lot of ways where you would figure out like, well, you're not really using it the right way. And if we help you use it the right way, you will actually have a better customer experience, which then was so integrated. Like we were so tied to customer service because we knew, hey, these are the pain points. And then that was tied to product development because we would work with product development. We actually, in many ways, were the glue between them because we saw, here's what's going on with the product. Here's what the customer experience is like. Here's how we can help bridge that gap between them. And I think there's a lot of opportunity around that. The other thing that stood out that, I mean, it may make, it may offend some internal L&D people, but don't take it this way. If this is you listening to it, I feel like the stakes are a lot higher in customer education because you have a lot more of these challenges tuned up to 11. So even like what you said with people don't have to take the training. So if you don't build a quality product and deliver it in a good way, there's no artificial noise that can make you feel good about it. It's just like they are using it. If you're not integrated with what they're trying to do, you're not going to, get the engagement from your customers. Or even I remember some of the challenges I dealt with where you would need to try and do something and go, I think if we invest in customer education here, it'd be like, you got to prove it. Like we've got to be able to justify making money on this because if we don't, this is nothing but expense. And so there are, I personally experienced firsthand that the stakes were very high with what you were trying to do around customer education.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've heard our customers often say that they look at education as a product offering.
Yep.
And it has to be treated as a product offering. It has to be that well investigated in terms of what problem needs to be solved, that well considered in terms of what type of learning is going to be built to solve that problem. And the delivery of it has to be so well thought through, because it is the end customer. It has
Yeah.
consequences, right? And it is also an investment, right, by the business. And so it needs to demonstrate the necessary level of returns.
Yeah. So on that, let's talk about some of these challenges because what you talked about there, I fully agree in thinking about customer experience and we're seeing similar trends. So you're on the customer education side. I dabble across customer internal, kind of the whole gamut. And we're seeing similar things happen on the employee side, where companies are
Mhm.
thinking more about integrated employee experience, where you go, hey, we can't think about employee experience as this fragmented world of whatever. We need to help them see it through one lens. Customer experience, I think, is going through what sounds like a very similar transformation. What do you see some of the challenges are, though, for customers to get on board with seeing it that way? Because over the years, I've run into plenty of customers who they haven't got there yet. And so they're still thinking about customer education as like, yeah, you know, if we get to it. And they aren't, like you said, thinking about it as, no, that's a product. That is a
Mhm.
product offering. We have to treat it as such. We have to invest in it as such. What are some of the barriers that you see as you run into customers who may be thinking about that and going, I guess now that as I'm listening to this, I don't really know what we do with customer education. And I think that's a big missed opportunity.
Sure. I think one of our partners not too long ago said this to me, and I thought it was so wise. They were talking about their own customer education program and how it came to be, and it was actually the CEO of the company said that customer education is one of those things that takes a little while for companies to realize they need to formally implement it, because educating the process of educating customers, while it's necessary since day one of the company, the expense of it kind of quietly and slowly creeps into the business. And
Okay.
before too long, it's actually a really expensive part of the operation, but you don't really notice it because it's always
It's like the
part-time.
slow boil. It's like the slow
Yeah,
boil. It's like the frog in the water that you just kind of slowly creeped up, and pretty soon you don't realize it's eating massive amounts of your dollars.
exactly. And it's because, it's 10% of 10 people's jobs. It's 5% of 100 people's jobs. And it's reactive and it's kind of getting the job done in the most essential way, right? It's responding to the customer's needs. And only until a company, I think, aggregates that and quantifies that, does a company then go, oh my gosh, this is really expensive and we're actually stink at it. And so I think that's a big part of it is just uh,
The
getting it on
awareness.
the radar, the awareness that not being deliberate about educating customers is a really expensive um, risk to run.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. And my experience has mirrored similar things where it's kind of like if you don't own a scale and you just never weigh yourself and you just kind of don't really pay attention. Then all of a sudden you step on it and you go, oh my word, like what happened here? Like,
What
how
happened?
did I get from here to here? And you didn't notice it. You slowly bought bigger pant sizes and all this other stuff. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, like how did we get from point A to point B? And I've seen similar things with customer education because, like you said, it never starts as like a full-time organization, which I'm sure as an entrepreneur, like I understand why companies don't start there because you're kind of in that environment where everybody's kind of doing a little bit. But I think to your point, the danger of that is you don't really have visibility into it because when it's 10% of everyone in the company's job, you're not necessarily recognizing, hey, there's actually 10 headcount if we were to tally this up that are doing nothing but this. There's 10 systems that we've kind of jerry-rigged to work that we've got licenses to this for customers all over the place that we just kind of didn't pay attention because we slowly added it up. And when companies start looking at that, it can sometimes be a shocking figure to look at.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So our primary customer base at Gainsight, at NorthPass and now at Gainsight, is B2B software companies. That's
Okay.
who NorthPass serves. That's who Gainsight serves. That's our
Okay.
audience, right? And this is, if you think about it, this is a very technologically progressive industry, right? I mean, we're building
Super.
software and we
Yeah.
use a lot of software. And we're very, the employees in this industry are very aware of the latest and greatest software. So one would think this is going to be a really progressive industry when it comes to digital customer education, right?
Not the case.
And it's so interesting. So about a year
Yeah.
ago, we started at NorthPass, we started building our own surveys and data set on what percentage of B2B software companies are doing customer education primarily manually versus primarily digitally. And I
Okay.
thought it was going to be like, well, 80% are primarily digital, right? No.
Okay. No,
So we
wouldn't
did
surprise me.
webinars where we'd have, 300 attendees on Zoom. We'd survey. And the first one we did came back 70% manual, 30% digital. And I went like, that's got to be wrong, right? So then what we did is we
Sounds about
actually
right.
built a little bot, I'd call it, and we gave it every B2B SaaS company website, and we said go look for an academy, an education center, um, you know, courses, certificate programs. Go look for those things. Came back, and it was almost 70-30. And it's just, no way. I still don't believe it. So then we joined forces with Gainsight. Gainsight is a massive brand,
Yeah, huge
access to
footprint.
basically every B2B SaaS company in the world. And so we've been doing the same survey to the Gainsight audience. And I'm not even kidding you. Just 2 weeks ago, we ran a webinar. We put the poll up, and I had a slide that I didn't show the audience. It was like my next up slide, which said 70-30. We did the poll, and it came back, I'm not even kidding you, within 1/10 of a decimal point, 70-30. And so I think we have enough data now to conclude that. And so that's the other piece, is that even in the most technically progressive industry
Yep.
in the world, manual customer education is still dominant. And I think it's because it just slowly and quietly creeps into the
Yep.
business. And so it's a huge opportunity.
It's a huge opportunity. What you just
organizations.
described, I mean,
Yeah.
the good news with that is, and I try and encourage people with this, because sometimes people hear some of this kind of futuristic stuff I talk about and they go, we are just not there. We're nowhere near there. And I think on a positive note, it's like, well, neither are most people. So you're not alone in that, which just means there's opportunity to grow. That actually doesn't surprise me one bit. The number of companies I've talked with, and I think this is, again, just true of customer education, not just customer education, but even employee education, where I'll talk with super progressive, innovative companies that you would think would be like, oh, they're building the latest in innovation on whatever. And you're like, what's your educational strategy? And they're like, well, we fly people in and we have classroom training. And you're like, wait, what? Like, you're inventing the latest innovation in whatever space, and your education model is the same as what we used in 1930, when we were doing classroom education. So I think it is one of those things where, to your point, it's a huge opportunity area, but there's a lot of value in doing it, and it can be overwhelming because of that creep factor.
Yep. Exactly.
So where do you see people starting with this? Because I think the other thing that can be risky with it is you can look at that and go, wait, you might hear and listen to us talk about this and go, wait, that's us. You're like listening and you go, that is our customer education strategy. We have like 10 people and we randomly do stuff, and I feel like our hair's on fire and we're running around and we're schlecking PowerPoint decks and we're doing whatever we can. And you can hear this integrated customer education strategy and go, holy cow, like that sounds like light years away from where we are today. Where do you see people getting started with that in ways that help them feel like, hey, look, you don't have to boil the ocean overnight, but these are some wise, intelligent steps you can take to get the ball rolling?
Yeah, I love that question. It's something we advise on all the time. And the best kind of story, I think that the most effective story I think I've been able to tell to help people be comfortable with that reality is if you look at some of the best um, academies that are out there, digital academies that are out there. The one that always comes to mind for me, because it was a big inspiration in my early career, is HubSpot Academy, right? And
They did a good job.
it's massive, right? They
Yep.
changed the world of marketing. They changed the profession of marketing, not only in educating people about their product, but also about this new way, which at the time was inbound, right? And
they built a
that
rockin' community around it as well. Like their customer
right,
community was huge.
amazing. So when we think of an example of that future state, I think they're by far closest to it. But I think what we always tell people is, hey, don't get overwhelmed by that. Realize that took them 12, 15 years to get to. They started with one course, right? About it was probably called something like the basics of inbound, right?
Right.
Something, if I had to guess, that's probably what it was. And then iterated from there. They started with the person building that course was probably dedicating 25% of their time. They were probably either an internal L&D professional kind of on loan to the customer experience area to work on this one course, or they were like an account manager or a or an implementation manager on loan to build this out, right? And then it took off from there. And so we always advise, our prospective customers or existing customers to just start small. Don't get overwhelmed by the grand vision. Aim, have the grand vision in mind, have a North Star, but
Sure.
start small. And we always say you need to dedicate, it's only going to happen if you make it part of someone's job, right? It
Yes.
can't any
You
longer
have.
be, hey, provide good customer service, be responsive to customers, make sure customers know what they're doing. It can't just be that as a company mandate. It has to be, hey, your job is to educate customers. Your job is to get our education program off the ground. And look, that could be 25%, could be 50%. It doesn't have to be 100% to start, right?
But you got to
And
nail it down and say, this is actually officially
you got to
part of your
nail it.
job, not a
This
nice
is
to, when you have time, fill in the cracks.
right, right. And then give that person the autonomy to, to be creative, right? Give them that creative latitude, and just simply give them the goal of, look at, give them the goal of identifying what the most painful problem is right now in the customer education process. And that could be an external goal. It could be something like, it takes customers too long to get initial value. It takes customers 10 weeks to get value. We need to make that 4. It could be an internal goal, which is something like, we have 35 customer success managers spending 40% of their time on training. I need to get that down to 25% of time, right? So it could
Okay.
be a operational efficiency goal. It could be a customer experience goal. So allow them to find that goal, and then give them that creative latitude to figure out how to solve that through education. That's the way we advise companies
Okay.
really get started down this path.
Okay. I like that. And maybe we could spend a little time unpacking this a little bit in order of it, because I think that really does help people. When a problem feels just overwhelming and too big, I've just seen over the years, it's just human behavior. When something feels too big and unattainable, we just tend to go, forget it. I can't do it. And I think some of the things that stood out to me, that any company that's, whether it's product, service, whatever you're doing, one of the things that you hit on that has actually been a theme from the beginning is take some time to understand where the pain points are. And to me, I think there's 2 that stood out. One is, where's those like customer pain points? Yes, you need to understand like that, because that's going to fuel, well, where do we start first? Because you don't want to spend people's time and attention on something that's like, well, nobody's actually struggling with this. You don't want to operate off assumptions. So some of it is that, but some of it then also, going back to what you said before, is if you don't know how big of a problem this customer education thing, because you've just had this seep factor go in, actually evaluate that, because that may help you know how much you should shift your focus on this. Because you may find out it's not just, well, let's make this 30% of somebody's job. You may actually do an analysis and realize, holy crap, with the amount of time and energy we're spending on this, we actually could build a small team that just says, this is your job now, type of a thing. Because you may discover, wow, with what we're spending, why wouldn't we have a core focus? Because going back to a good customer experience, it's not a good customer experience if, well, it depends on who I talk to. If I get Jill, it's great. She's super helpful. It's a quality. I talk to Bill, it's awful. If I talk to and I remember back in my software days, that was a big problem I was trying to solve in and of itself was, hey, we can't have this. Customer experience is dependent on the person that they engage with. That is a very dangerous place to put yourself, because if that person goes or that person's not available, suddenly you're too dependent on a very vulnerable factor.
That consistency is so key. I remember one time we kind of hired a brand agency to help us with a little bit of messaging, and they went out and talked to many of our customers and to get kind of the key words that our customers would say about the value delivered, and consistency. A consistent experience was actually one of the things that our customers would mention in when they would describe the value of our learning platform. They could provide a consistent educational experience. I thought that was really really interesting. So you really hit on it.
Well, and I think I know a lot of folks from McDonald's, and it's interesting because you talk to people, McDonald's people either love it or hate it or whatever. But one thing is, that is one of the biggest things that McDonald's is known for, is you can be anywhere in the world, and if you go get a Big Mac, you know what you're going to get. And it's part of their competitive differentiator is the fact that as a customer, you know what that experience is. And so it helps you understand the value of the product and where it is instead of being like, I don't really know where to place it. And I think that's something that is often underestimated in the value of product strategy is, hey, is it consistent across the board? Because if it's not, that could actually be a deterrent for our customer because all it takes is one customer has a terrible experience and then that experience is shared with others and it can spread really quick.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
So then something else that stood out that as I'm thinking about that is so there's kind of that front end analysis both on the customer side and the product side or the customer and kind of your own internal operations. Because I guarantee to your point, if 70% of people are still going old school with this, anybody watching and listening, you go run the reports, have your analysts dig into there's opportunity area for you.
Hmm.
Is that a fair
Yep.
assessment? Like I think probably in all your years of doing it, it's like, no, we've had a customer, they had no opportunity areas. It's there. But I think something that you shared that I think would be interesting, going back to kind of the cross-functional partnerships, chances are someone in your company is doing some sort of educational strategy somewhere
Yeah.
and building those bridges. You said we didn't even know that chances are there was a corporate learning group that we could have tapped into. Maybe we weren't customer education strategy, but boy, if we'd known that that existed, we could have at least shared best practices, worked together, and kind of help figure some of that stuff out so you don't have to be alone. And I think a lot of people overlook that as an opportunity area because we get caught in our silos. Oh, we're product development. Well, right. But if education is a product, you're probably doing education somewhere else in your company that you could collaborate on.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. When we're working with companies that are just getting started with customer education for the first time, and they say, "How do we get started?" And we go back to what I just talked about, where hey, you got to find a person and appoint that person to run with this, even if it's a quarter of their time. It oftentimes the right person to pick is the person that's just naturally gravitating to it, and everyone's going to them to do it
Yeah.
anyway. You mentioned backstage when we were kind of getting to know each other a little better that you were tapped to help run this program
I was
because
the sales
you,
rep. I was the sales
yeah,
rep out in the territory.
but everyone around you was always getting better, and there was a reason. It was because you were naturally a good educator, and so people saw that, and we often see that's like pretty common in companies is there's always a couple people that are naturally really gifted with this, have a passion for it, but they just haven't put a label on it yet. It hasn't been a deliberate assignment yet, and so we always encourage our customers to go find that person, and
Yeah.
and they're gonna crush it.
They will, because to your point, going back to it is a skill set that someone has. And there are some people where it's, I mean, and again, I just think of we often assume that everybody knows. I mean, the number of people I coach from all different fields, we often assume everybody understands the complexity of skills and roles and all this other stuff. And actually, most people really don't. They kind of know
Mhm.
their lane and they kind of know what they've been doing, and they don't necessarily have this bigger picture view. So, to the senior leaders listening to this, those people exist in your company. They're out there, they're doing it naturally, and you can find them by going, who, like you said, who are the people that their very presence just raises the tide for everyone around them. And when you dig into
Right.
it, you go, oh, they're doing all these other things. Hey, how could we repurpose that person to say, you know what? We need to focus on this. And then it's no longer we've got to build a business case for a head of customer education strategy. And people go, well, that just feels like a lot. You probably have that. And it sounds like that's been your experience as well in companies is they can find that tribe of people who can help them with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. They just need to be designated and really empowered to do it.
Okay. So as I think about the last one that I really appreciated you drilling in on was the starting small.
Mhm.
I think that to me is one of the things that a lot of times people just go big. And there are times and places to go big with things, but not everything. And I think sometimes that experimental mindset of, hey, like, let's try some of this, let's figure this out. Like you said, HubSpot, they didn't come out with a full blown community and an entire suite of customer education on year one of their customer education strategy, because it's just not possible. No company is going to get behind that. And I think sometimes that can be discouraging to people because it's always that like, how do I just get there? And you don't.
Mm-hmm.
It's a process. You build towards it. And I think that's great advice to people to say, get the data, figure out who those people who are, and make them actually responsible for it. And then let them experiment and try some things. I will say from a customer education standpoint, and I'm curious if you've got any thoughts on this, I continue to be surprised, and not just customer educate, but just education in general. There's no like Mary Poppins bag where you just go, I always pull these same tricks out and they always work exactly the same. I really love the experimentation side and continue to be fascinated by, man, sometimes something you thought was going to work great because that's what it says you should do just belly flops. And then other times you try something different and you're like, whoa, this just took off like a rocket.
I know, it's so true. I have much less exposure to the internal employee education side, but on the customer side, products are different, people are different, the way people interface with different products is different. And so you just have a whole it's so dynamic on that front. And I'll never forget. Speaking of HubSpot, actually, I spoke at the Inbound conference 2 years ago with some of our customers. I led a panel with a couple of our customers. It was on the topic of why education is such a critical part of the customer experience. And one of our customers said it was just so profound. He was the person that was naturally just educating people, and his company
Yeah.
said, "Hey, you're awesome at this. Let's like make this part of your job." And he thrived in it. And one of the reasons he said that he was able to be so effective early on was he said that before he did anything, he listened to hundreds of hours of customer call recordings.
Mm,
He said, and he used the product Gong, right? The call recording and
yep.
conversation intelligence product. He said he used it so much that they emailed him and said, "You're one of our like top 5% power users and have consumed like the most recording time. What are you doing? And we would love to talk to you." So he used that point to just emphasize how obsessed he became with listening to what the customers cared about. And through that, he was able to debunk all of his company's original ideas, all of his original hypotheses about where to get started, right? Because he was committed to starting small. But when you start
Yep.
small, you have to be really intentional about the one thing you do.
Yep.
And while you don't want to like belabor that decision forever, you do want to be thoughtful about it. And so
Yes.
his path was go listen to a few hundred hours of call recording on like super fast speed to get through it
Yeah.
quickly.
Just to basically pick
And
up yep.
and he said it became incredibly obvious what to focus on when he finished that exercise. And he was and because not only did he identify the problem, he identified what customers were craving as the solution. And so it was a blueprint. The customers laid out the blueprint for him, and he was able to
Yeah.
very quickly put together a high quality education product that, and this is a really small company. This company is sub 100
Yeah.
employees, right? And so they launched on LinkedIn, they launched to their customers, and it was not a certification program, but they did offer like a certificate of completion. And they had, I think, 300 or 400 people go through it in the first 30 days. And
Doesn't
why
surprise me.
did they do a brilliant job promoting it? No, it's because
They were solving a problem.
they actually built what the customers wanted, and so it naturally took off.
So two things that you just said that really jumped out that I think is encouraging and things that people can walk away from this. One is for people, I know right now with everything going on with AI and skills, and a lot of people are struggling to go, what can I do like, where do I go? What's the future look like for jobs and all these other things? What we just described to me is an encouragement to people who really are relentlessly curious and love to solve problems for people, because this need in an organization, I mean, we just spent the last almost hour talking about how sizable of a need and opportunity this is. And so for people who may be going, what do I want to do next? Or these problems we just described, if you go, I actually really like doing that kind of stuff, there's actually a career path. I mean, I've helped people and worked alongside and seen people who have taken what started as like a small portion of their job and built it into a massive career because it is such a huge opportunity, which I think should be encouraging to anybody going like, and it was never a path they thought they would take because they didn't know it was a path that existed. And I think
Right.
we've kind of painted like, hey, there's a whole ecosystem of career opportunity in this. But I think the other thing, oh, go for it.
Yeah, I think so. And I think one of the things is so exciting about, our recent combination with Gainsight is even just for me, just kind of like coming in with like learning a lot about the bigger picture here is historically, even I thought of customer education and like, well, okay, it's customer education. And you build courses, you build certification programs, you promote
No.
this. But now it's like, well, no, there is this incredible world of customer experience, right? And digital customer operations. And
Yep.
you can say customer education is part of the chief learning officer's remit, or you
Okay.
can say it's actually part of the customer
Customer
experience
strategy.
leader's customer
Yeah.
strategy, right? And more I see it so tightly connected to the customer strategy. And so for aspiring professionals, you don't have to go directly into customer education. You can go into
No.
community, you can go into digital customer operations, you can go into digital customer content creation, customer marketing, and um, and eventually find yourself as part of this really dynamic organization that is doing
Yes.
what, right? At the end of the day, it's helping customers learn why they should use your product and how they use your product, right? And
Yep.
call that customer experience, call it education, call it whatever you want. But as an aspiring
No, but
educator,
it's
you can go
business
into something.
strategy. I
Yeah.
don't think, I mean, I say this, I've said this on a number of different things. Talent is for internal talent is your business strategy because all the strategy in the world, if you don't enable and equip people to do it well, it's all for naught. And I've actually given advice, and again, I've got some different perspectives on this depending on the situation, but I was actually in a large organization once, and I had the opportunity to absorb customer education under the internal part, and I actually said no. That
Mm,
is a distinct discipline that requires the intentional effort and focus. And that needs to be part of customer strategy. That is a different persona, it's a different focus area. And if you just treat it as an afterthought, you're not going to get the value out of it.
yeah.
Because, in my opinion, I mean, I think I told you backstage, I built a customer education strategy that started outperforming financially our product line,
Mhm.
one of our product lines, because it was such a huge opportunity. So I think going back to this career opportunity, it's huge for people who may
Yeah.
be interested in this. But I
Yeah.
think getting
The
back to it,
monetization is a
oh, go for it.
whole
That's another
monetization of
animal.
that's
That's
a whole
another
thing.
animal.
Yeah. We could
But
tackle
it's
that in another
possible.
hour.
I know we could do a
Yeah.
whole, I told you we could do like a 3.5 hour marathon on this because that's another animal, but it's huge and it's rich with opportunity. But again, you got to get it right because people will
Mhm.
not pay for a haphazard, portal of nonsense. But I think
Right.
the other thing you hit on that I think is so important, going back to the story of the gentleman that you talked about on the panel, what differentiated that individual was that relentless curiosity to understand the pain point of someone else and to want to solve that and to not go into it going, I have my idea what I need to do. Now I need to try and convince everybody else it's great. It's, I'm really trying to understand where you are and what I can do to help fix that, to bridge that, to enable it, to make it a better place for you. And I think that's such an important thing whenever you're dealing with people, because if you're trying to
Mhm.
convince them of your way, you're pushing a rock uphill. But if you actually take the time to listen and understand and go, here's how I'm solving this for you, it greases the skids significantly. I'll just say that.
Yeah. Yeah. He was definitely one of my hero customers. It really
For
inspired us for
sure.
sure. It was awesome.
So last question for you, and then we'll close this one up. is I'm curious technically I have two. We'll see if we have enough time for it. But one is, as you kind of look at where things are going and how things have changed, going back to kind of the early 2000s, it was like, okay, this is kind of where things were. You've been in the space now. What are some of the biggest observations you have on how are things evolving? Where are things going? And what are some of the interesting observations you have from the vantage point you're at?
Well, I mentioned before is just I think there's I think there's going to be a more blended
Okay.
experience, right? Where it's not just that kind of traditional academy structure or community structure or knowledge based structure or blog structure. I think in the future, we're going to see a much more integrated, personalized experience. And we're going to see a lot of blending of those disciplines. So that's one area that's really interesting, being enabled by converging technology points, converging roles. I think the other, right, which is something just so exciting, which everybody knows, is AI. And what is the impact of AI? I think there's two sides of that. One is, how does AI help education practitioners become more productive? And
Agreed.
and I think content is an obvious area to look, or segmentation of who needs what, and
Well, I
the
even think, going
automation
back to what we
delivery.
talked about before, of like analyzing where the opportunities are. AI is fantastic for identifying those patterns and trends and things like
Right.
that. So
Huge. But then I think the part that's less talked about is, what is AI? What does AI mean for how the learner learns, how the learner consumes information, right? Because yes, we can like incorporate all this AI to make our content creators and learning designers way more productive. But what if we do all of that, but then like the paradigm of learning actually changes, right?
yeah.
What does the future of a course look like? What is the future of that? How people consume knowledge and practice skills? How does AI change all of that? I was talking to a founder in the learning space, and she's doing such inspirational work, and she's working on a new startup that's working on providing an AI-driven learning experience for sales coaching.
Okay.
Fascinating,
Yeah.
fascinating stuff, right? Breaking the mold of all the kind of traditional learning formats. So I think that's an area that's like less obvious and more exciting than
Yeah.
productivity gains through AI.
Okay. No, I think you're well, and again, we talked about the integration. I think what I'm seeing is that's just becoming more and more an expectation. It used to
Mhm.
be more of a nice to have. I see, from just an overall people are expecting from their products, it's becoming well, we just expect this from you. It's not and I think that's only going to rise. To your point
Mhm.
on AI, people, I won't get into this because we start unlocking this one. People know how deep this rabbit hole goes. But again, the ability to reimagine what's possible for the way we develop and grow people. And I think the opportunity to help people give real opportunity to experience and develop, instead of just, hey, here's some more information. That
Right.
information is really important and it's really good. And going back to what you said early on, the context is just as important as the content, because if people don't understand the why and all this, a lot of that, and I think AI can be a big enabler of that to help people contextualize this. But I think the opportunity to actually give people some real hands-on opportunity to grow and develop, it's huge. And I see it on the internal side a ton, but I see the same opportunity on the customer education side. It's just a matter of putting that intentional focus on it.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt.
Cool. Well, we are at time. So, Steve, I just want to thank you again. I know we've been kind of bouncing around getting this on the schedule. I'm glad we were able to make it happen here in January, because to me, as we come into 2024, huge opportunity area continues to be. And I think there's some exciting stuff happen. So I appreciate you being here to just kind of share where things are at and where it's going, and how we can continue to make sense of all this and really make an impact on our business through this.
Hey, it's my pleasure, and thanks for continuing to build our community and promote the world of education. It's so important for everything you're doing. So important for the future of what we're all building. So thank you, Chris.
Yeah, no problem. Well, thank you everybody for watching, listening. I will be back next week If you're not already subscribed to the Substack and you missed parts of this and you want to catch the Cliff Notes version of what we talked about and what some of the biggest takeaways are, definitely check that out. It's just christopherlind.substack.com, and you can find that there. I will have that out later this week. But Steve, thank you again so much. Thanks everybody for listening and watching, and we will see you on the other side.